This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
We are back with Dr. Lisa Jaynes Johnson. She's in private practice as a family therapist, and of course, talking more about her memoirs called My Relationship with Oprah. And we're going to get to a lot today. If you haven't met her yet, you're in for a treat. It's excited to have her back here. And in our last interview, you described seeking a spiritual solution, really, to her physical and emotional problems with food, applying those recovery principles to her work with those suffering from domestic violence and child abuse. Then, on the 10-year anniversary of the assault, one of the convicted assailant's lawyers came to her door unannounced to ask her support for his early release, but without any amends or apology for the harm done or her or the community. So, Lisa, how did your family of origin support you or not support you? Or did they provide that foundation to help you with your long life dedication to restorative justice?
Thanks. Yes, they absolutely did. I think one of the things when I really think about the foundations of the work that I do now, a lot of it came both not just from my parents, but my parents' parents and goes back a few generations. I grew up in Chicagoland, and the whole Oprah thing is significant for me because I was just surrounded by TV and newspapers, and Chicago had several television stations, public television, as well as the major television stations. The Jackson Five were living in Gary, Indiana, which was, the neighbor to the, right next door to where I grew up, maybe 10 miles from my home. I grew up watching soap operas like All My Children and One Life to Live when our housekeeper would come to clean. My parents would listen to news radio in the morning. Um, and then as I got older, it was more like the media of radio, of WLS, and the loop, classic music. And as I got older, my boyfriend's band introduced me to WXRT, Chicago's finest rock. And that's really the foundation of the sports. I call it sports ball. There's Cubs and the White Sox and the Bulls and the Bears. And I was there for the three-peat from the Bulls and the when I remember seeing the Bears win the Super Bowl. And it was around the time Phil Donahue was starting and taping his show in Chicago. This is when Oprah came along. So I was really surrounded by all this media, not just from Chicagoland, but also the newspapers. My mother wrote for the newspaper. My father worked in community service. We were all involved in making the world a better place. One of the things I think was really foundational about my parents is they were both very involved in community service. My dad grew up in the Chicagoland area, in the Rogers Park in Chicago, and my family goes back to the Chicago fire. We have an old family story that we can tell over and over again, and I do often tell the story of the Chicago fire, different versions for different audiences about how my family survived this disaster and how everybody pulled together in the community. I also come from my mother's side of the family, where my mother's mother and her parents marched on Washington for women's right to vote
Wow.
in 1913. Both my grandmothers were presidents of the League of Women Voters. My mother was a president of the League of Women Voters. My family was involved in making decisions about what happens in our community, not because they were running it for office, but because they were those kinds of citizens. And my mom was a newspaper reporter while I was in high school. My dad worked as a safety engineer in the steel mill. So he studied international relations. He would have loved to do like international relations and gone do, negotiations like a diplomat, but he ended up being a safety engineer and helped people not get hurt or damaged or seriously or even killed, seriously killed,
Wow.
working at the steel. So
Ah,
my parents gave me this legacy
yeah,
of community service. I call it a social justice marriage.
yeah.
They met at University of Chicago, and they were at a World Federalist Association meeting, which was the organization that started the United Nations. So it gives you a sense of the kind of people who I was being raised by. While my dad had a master's degree from Loyola and his undergrad from University of Chicago, and my mother went to college when I was in high school to get her degree as a drug and alcohol counselor. So they both were taking their careers and making a difference in the world as well. So I really had this strong foundation of people who were involved in making the world a better place, even before what happened to me. So,
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. Now, it was during your freshman year of college, right, that you were the victim of an assault. And could you talk a little bit about that and how your parents supported you through those years?
one of the things that I was really impressed by from my parents is how they were a team when it came to parenting in a way that they would they each knew what their strengths were and would each take different roles in providing the kind of care I need. You might expect that my mom was the kind of person who's there with her arm around me, comforting me when I was crying. Nope, that was my dad. That was my dad for me. My mother was the person who was over there arranging and making sure that I had everything I needed in order to get my needs met from kind of other people, including my older sisters when I was younger. But she was the kind of person who, if I was throwing up, my dad was rubbing my back, and my mom was asking if I wanted me to go to wanted to go her to go to the store to buy ginger ale. They were just that kind of divide and conquer parents. And my mother being a newspaper reporter, by the time I was going to court, she would go into the courthouse during the courtroom when there was a separation of witnesses. And I would sit with my dad on the bench outside, and he would help me feel comfortable and safe and ready to prepare and go testify in court while my mom got to get all the information about the stuff that I couldn't hear because of the separation of witnesses. So they both used their skills, they both played a role in supporting me. My mother was instrumental in getting me into mental health care immediately afterwards. She had gone to school to become a drug and alcohol counselor while I was in high school, and she even volunteered, signed me up to be in the Coalition Against Sexual Assault conference we went to together. We drove there together and she got a sponsorship for us to be able to attend that conference, which benefited her profession because it gave her some CEUs and stuff, but also, gave me the support I needed to put my experience to work to help other people. My mother wasn't just modeling that for me, she was like actually supporting it. She would type my papers when I would write a paper in school because I wasn't a great typist. I didn't have that great. And my dad was a different kind of support person. He would go with me whenever I had to talk, whenever I had to testify. He was with me when I was hypnotized by the detectives to make sure that nobody manipulated the information, especially me. He was there at my side to protect me. So they both worked very closely together to provide the kind of loving support I needed to get through the trials and to stand up for what was right and stand by my side. Um, so
Yeah.
that was impressive. I think my parents were very exceptional in that.
Oh my goodness, really was. And now, by the time you were on the Oprah Winfrey Show, right? So you thought really that you were finished with the legal system, right? But what happened?
Well, I didn't know at the time, and nothing had happened yet at the time. But at that point, once I thought that was over with, and I was going on to try to work on making a difference in the world, um, I I was definitely using some of the dysfunctional behaviors that I also learned in my childhood, eating, substance use, that kind of thing, that was a coping mechanism that I also learned in my family that was different from that wasn't necessarily the healthiest thing, but it gave me some security, some safety, to get through the difficult time of trying to, in college, I really studied how people recover from sexual assault. And then when I became a therapist, by the time I became a therapist, I had gained enough weight that I was over 300 pounds. And so I realized when I was trying to work and help other people that I needed to get a handle on my own relationship with food and drugs and alcohol in order to really, truly help people. And so by the time I got my master's degree, I may have been a capable therapist for starting, but I needed to find my own health and recovery program, which actually ended up making me a better step, better therapist, like the 12-step program. And that was really the introduction to the kind of thought behind restorative justice, that making amends, the part of the 12 steps, made direct amends to such people I've harmed, no matter what, no, whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. That's one of the steps in the 12 steps. And that is making amends is a really important step in restorative justice. First learned about that in my own recovery program. And by the way, before my mom became a drug and alcohol counselor, she went through her own recovery treatment program and had her own relationship with the 12 steps. She did not much care for the 12 steps because my mother was quite the feminist Protestant. And so she didn't really appreciate some of the 1970s version of Alcoholics Anonymous, the language that was more male oriented and those kinds of things. She was quite the feminist and stood for women in sobriety, not necessarily the kind of program that AA offered. However, I did get introduced to the 12 steps early on because of my mother's own experience with her recovery. So that foundation also, even though she didn't ascribe to the 12 steps, by the time I was an adult and I needed for my own food recovery, I took that program and applied it not only into my personal life, but then I learned how to use those
Yeah.
concepts to heal relationships where there
Wow.
had been child neglect, domestic violence, those kinds of things.
Wow. This is a
Mission
lot. Thank you so much.
to
Oh, go ahead.
well, I was on a mission to change the conditions that allow children to be abused
Yep.
and promoting violence from within families and into our communities. I truly, truly believe the reason that somebody pointed a gun in my face and hurt me is because of the conditions that cause those people to think that's the only option for their management survival in the life. When I sat there thinking this, when I was in court, and Hill, who had been a year younger than me at the day of the assault, I thought about the fact that he's another high school student. He's another 18-year-old. He's another young adult. But you know who he was? He was a young adult who grew up in Gary, Indiana. One of the most, you know, dis disenfranchised communities in my neighborhood. One of the places where you're warned not to go because it's dangerous. And the options for him in his life didn't look the same as it did for somebody like me, a white girl from Highland, Indiana, with college educated parents who are supporting her through her college. That kind of privilege that I had, homeowners, middle class, hope for the futures, inheritance, those kinds of things, family stories that go back generations of trying to make a difference in the world. That kind of foundation I don't believe that he had available to him. And so, what I was looking for is how do we create a world where I'm not the only person who gets that kind of foundation? How can I help other people get that kind of foundation in their life, even
Yeah.
if they do have
Yeah.
addiction, dysfunction? My dad was blind, he had four eye transplants. My mother struggled with addiction, for example. So, anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think by the 1990s, right, you mentioned Winfrey reinvented her show, right? She started focusing on literature, self-improvement, mindfulness, spirituality. She was criticized, for unleashing a confession culture, promoting controversial self-help ideas and emotion-centered approach, but she was also praised for overcoming adversity to become a benefactor to others. So she was the third woman to own her own production company, and that was after Mary Pickford and Lucille Ball at the same time that her talk show went into national syndication. Oprah was about to become one of the most influential storytellers of the generation, right? Well, you also mentioned earlier a little bit about your sister, our older sister, that's Edie, right? And she was the one who supported you throughout your life. Tell us more about this relationship with her, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. I love to talk about my sister Edie. After um, after being on the show and after she came to the keynote address and talked about her dress, I was a bit disillusioned by Oprah, and I kind of stopped watching the show that much. But my sister recorded it every single day and watched it when she came home from work. And my sister Edie, who was 12 years older than me, had been put in that position with my other sister Phyllis, who was 10 years older than me, to be the caregivers when my sister Wendy and I were born. And so my connection with Edie has been since birth as my like emotional mother. I feel I turn to
Yeah.
her. She's known me since the day I was born, and she remembers most of this story. And I do have plans to bring her later on in the series when she's available to participate in the conversation about what it was like for her to see me go through all these things. She's also been reading some of the stories in the books and stuff, so she's amazed I can remember so much. But Edie was the one who was more of a follower of Oprah than I was at that point. But there was no escaping my relationship with Edie since she was basically my emotional mother, the person who I
Yeah.
would turn to when I was little. However, by the time I was 6, she was off to college. And by the time I was 8 years old, 9 years old, she
Oh,
had moved California, and I was still at home with my parents. And as the youngest one, as my older sisters, who were my
mm,
caregivers, out and moved away, I was kind of left in
yeah.
what felt like to fend for myself. When I look back historically at my life, I can see these patterns that I now know are responses to attachment issues and problems. Like I began shoplifting after my sister left. My best friend from childhood who lived down the street, her mother had committed suicide, and she and I had both kind of lost our mothers at the same time, even though my
Yeah.
biological mother was still in the home and alive and functional. She was declining into her alcoholism. My mother was declining into alcoholism. My friend's mother was gone, and my emotional mother had moved off to college and to get married and move to California. So I really was starting to flounder as a little girl, looking for a connection, looking for guidance and support. Edie would always tell me that I could call, collect if needed. We had a trick:
Mm-hmm. Aw.
call, collect, hang up, and call back because she
Yeah.
knows the number I'm from. We don't have to call collect anymore. Long distance isn't such a big deal anymore. But when I was a kid, it was like 10 cents a minute and don't run up the phone bill kind of thing. Um, and after my sister got married in California, I went and stayed with her for a summer. And she really, when she looks back and talks about this time, she was
Mm-hmm.
really trying to demonstrate that she could do a better job parenting me than my parents were doing, since obviously I was getting in trouble for shoplifting.
Yeah.
And
Ah.
she brought me over to her place for the summer and thought she could do a better job. I did not do much better at her house. I was just as, yeah, adventurous, I guess we could call it. She was telling me not to play with the candles, and she came home one day and all the wax was melted into her
Ah.
carpeting. Yeah, I was not an easy 9-year-old for her to care for while she was learning how to be a school psychologist. So she's also another role model for psychotherapy. My sister became a school psychologist. My mom became a drug and alcohol counselor. And as adults, she thought she could take a better care of me,
Yeah.
but she had her own challenges with that. Um, One of the things that seemed to be a big issue in my family was my weight. How much I weighed, how
Yeah.
much I ate. was a big deal for me, for my family. And even before the incidents when I was younger, she found um, I had dance class. I still love dancing and I do aerobics and those kinds of things, videos and those kinds of things for exercise. But I was the fat kid in the family. And so whenever my mother was supposed to go on a diet, I was supposed to go on a diet too. And you know what?
Wow.
Whenever my mother was off the diet, she would sneak off and say, "Ooh, don't tell dad. We're going to go out to eat and it'll be our little secret." So I became my mother's diet partner and secret keeper. I also was supposed to be the secret keeper for my sisters, who, in order to use the car when they were teenagers, they had to take my sister Wendy and I with us. And so if they were doing something in the car that they weren't supposed to do, according to my parents, I was supposed to we were all supposed to keep our sister secrets. And
Oh,
sister secrets and mommy secrets, don't tell dad secrets aren't really healthy for a
no.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old little girl. I wasn't that good at being a secret keeper. And my relationship with food and advanced like the relationship with my mother in and out of, I thought I was connecting with my mom when I'd be on the diet with her. And um, I also had really difficult experiences with physical PE classes. It was just really a rough childhood when it being the fat kid. Um, but Edie was the person who introduced me to loving myself from the inside out. And she and introduced me to Weight Watchers and to exercise videos. And she tried her very best to find the finest education in child psychology that for me. My sister
Um,
shared all the resources that she learned about her own self-acceptance with me and encouraged me to be, the best I can be. One of the things I really was impressed by with my sister Edie is one of her best friends had facial deformation that affected the way people perceived her best friend. And she saw how differently people behaved based on beauty and appearance. My mother was a person who also really poo-pooed beauty as a power move, if you know what I
yeah.
mean by
Yeah.
that. Then she had 4 beautiful daughters, so there you go. But the my sister Edie taught me more about things like achieving health at any size or fit or fat and learning to come from self-acceptance and identification rather than from a place of shame, guilt, or diminishing myself. Um, so that's, the situation with my sister going that when I was 9. Once I came back, I had to fend for myself again. My Both of my sisters had moved out of the house. My oldest sisters, the sister that was 2 years older than me was still at home, but she was, more my peer than my caregiver. And my mother declined into alcoholism and needed to go into inpatient treatment by the time I was 11. So the alcohol was present, the food was present.
Yeah.
There was a lot going on in my childhood then.
Oh my goodness. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I want to talk more about your sister, your return, after when you return. So, can we continue and pick this up next week? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And how can we reach out to you in the meantime?
Well, you can visit the website to see the progress with the book and the podcast, myrelationshipwithoprah.com. And if we're looking for referrals for counseling, it's lisajohnsonlmft.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And looking forward to speaking with you again. Thank you for all this insight and speaking about this and helping so many with your story and your journey. Thank you. Bye bye.
See you.
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.